how does this relate to what I already know? Because the more I get in touch with that, the more I make the connections out here. Where do I think this is going? Do I have questions? And we'll look at the strategies, changing the first sentence of each paragraph to a question, changing the headings to a question. All of those things I need to be looking at right here as I am reading. I am reading along, I come to any punctuation, stop, step back in my mind. Now, at first, you just do this because you're told to do this. But if you do it a little while, the processes become very easy and you'll do it automatically. You'll be reading, you will be observing your reading as you're reading, and you will be applying the strategies as we go along. Now, here's something very crucial. Remember, we need not get the information here, we need to get it up here so that it's useful. If it doesn't get to here, it's not useful. Okay, here's where we left off. We left off with looking at, I need to strengthen anything that I've just learned. Anything I have learned means I've tied new information to old information. I've grown a new dendrite, but it's going to start to reabsorb itself into the brain if I don't strengthen it. That's what forgetting is. Here's what the average college student looks like. They're going to forget 50% by this time tomorrow, and they're going to forget 80% within 2 weeks. If you don't strengthen this dendrite, it's going. Now you'll remember that you talked about it, but you can't use it. If you can't pull it up, it's not useful. It's got to get to here. To get to here, I first have to reflect on what I am learning. I can't just keep reading, hoping to remember what I read. Now there's some things in here that you need to know. One of them is, every time you re-expose yourself to something you've just learned, this little fat right here called the myelin sheath wraps itself around this little connection here called the axon. Every time you re-expose yourself, it wraps again. And if it wraps again, it's like insulation, and the electrical signal gets faster, up to 300 to 3,000 times faster. If I'm trying to make plans and solve a problem, I don't need to have to think about everything I know. I need to have learned anything that I have learned to become an expert in my field that I am studying. Needs to get to this part of the brain, and it needs to be organized. If it gets to that part of the brain, if I have been building this myelin sheath for those brain cells that are in here, I'll get to it just like that. The more I re-expose, that's a huge strategy. Most of your strategies are built around re-exposure. All that information comes to this present moment where I am right this minute trying to solve the problem, and I can solve it much easier. There are people who get to be my age who are not very interested, they're boring, and they're boring to themselves. And you want to know why they're boring to themselves? They can't bring much to the present moment, and they keep just bringing one little thing, the same thing over and over, and if you come talk to them, they're saying the same conversation they said before. I go to committee meetings all the time where it's the same thing over and over. People can't bring anything fresh. That's what you want to be able to do. You want to be able, if you become a sociologist, and that's what you're studying, to fresh. So, I've got to build this, so all the strategies that I am using in here, in the reflection process, whether it's before I'm reading, during I'm reading, or after I'm reading, in the moment, as I'm reading, I'm constantly stepping back in my mind and observing my thinking about whatever it is I'm learning. If I don't do that, I will just continue reading, or I will highlight and come back and try to remember. That's fine. If you want to do this and your teachers give you all multiple choice tests, you recognize that you've seen it before but haven't really learned anything, this is great. But if you want to be the best in your field, this is what you want to do. You want to store it here. That means you've got to reflect, and you've got to re-expose yourself to the information. You've got to build this myelin sheath so it's faster. While you're sleeping, there are electrical storms that go through your brain from left to right, from top to bottom and back, that go through and start reabsorbing all the dendrites that you learned, all the experiences you had during the day, if those experiences weren't strengthened. The opposite occurs if it was strengthened. If you've done something during the day to strengthen this dendrite, this new learning, it actually takes the opportunity to help organize it, to consolidate it, to strengthen it into the brain so that it's stronger, and even make new connections for you without you even being aware of it. Absolutely huge. So don't highlight and say, this is what I need to learn, and then study it before the test. At the point that you are learning, constantly step back and use the strategies, and we'll learn a bunch of strategies. Most of them built around re-exposure, writing, mind mapping, all sorts of stuff. But it has to happen while at this point. I can get to it. Stop. Now remember, re-exposure strengthens this, builds this. I can get to it faster. I have it better. If I have been reflecting, it'll move up to here. The other thing that I have to do is I have to learn to think about the big picture. That's kind of what I'm doing for the student right here. This is the big picture. When you're reading in sociology, psychology, biology, whatever it is, you don't want to read and learn a bunch of details. You want to connect it to the big picture. The big picture, you get the big picture in here, and all the things you're reading, when you step back and reflect about it, and think about how does it fit the big picture. It goes in here within the big picture. The brain learns it easily and retrieves it easily, and you keep building larger connected networks instead of a bunch of isolated pieces of information. In sociology, as we were looking at sociology, sociology is about group interaction, how people interact in groups and individuals act in groups. When you learned about culture, what did it have to do with that? When we learned about norms, what did that have to do with culture? Culture, everything you ever learned. And one of the things was about behavior. Norms is about behavior. Folkways is about norms. Norms are about rules. It all relates back. You have to build that neural network, and you can't be starting with details and hope to build a big picture. Get the big picture up front. In psychology, how does the mind affect behavior? When we looked at psychological disorders, we found out that it was about abnormal behavior, that it was a mental illness that affects behavior and a bunch of other things. And then we looked and saw that there were criteria for abnormal behavior, which makes it a psychological disorder. So we started looking at eating behaviors, mood disorders, anxiety disorders. How do those fit the criteria for abnormal behavior that makes it a psychological disorder that is about how the brain affects behavior? You see how that it's building the big picture and learning the information within that big picture that is huge. When you reflect and do that, how does this relate to what I have just learned? All the decision-making, planning, problem-solving, the ways you need to reason and use the information you're learning can come to any moment that you're trying to deal with that. It is absolutely huge. Thank you.